The Oldest Story Ever Told by Romain Gary. La Paz is 12,000 feet above sea level. Any higher and it is impossible for men to breathe. There are llamas, Indians, arid plateau, eternal snows, ghost towns, eagles, and below, in the tropical valleys, wander gold prospectors and giant butterflies. Schonenbaum had dreamed of La Paz, the capital of Bolivia, almost every night during the 2 years he had spent in the Teutoburg concentration camp in Germany. And when the American troops at last opened the gates to what seemed to be another world, he struggled to obtain his Bolivian visa with that tenacity which only true dreamers can translate into action. Schonenbaum was a tailor by profession, a tailor in Lodz, in Poland, heir to a great tradition which 5 generations of Jewish tailors had made illustrious. He settled in La Paz, and after a few years of diligent labour he was able to set up on his own and soon enjoyed comparative prosperity under the sign Schonenbaum, Paris Tailor. Orders flowed in, and soon he had to look for an assistant. This wasn't easy. The Indians of the Upper Andes provide the world with an astonishingly limited number of Paris tailors, and delicacy with the needle is not often one of their crafts. Schonenbaum had to spend too much time teaching them the rudiments of the art for such a collaboration to be profitable. After several attempts, he resigned himself to remaining alone, despite the mounting load of work. But an unexpected encounter solved his problems in a manner that, he was certain, revealed the hand of Providence, which had always shown itself well disposed towards him, since of the 300,000 Jews from Lodz, he was one of the few survivors. Schonenbaum lived on the heights above the town, and the llama trains passed under his window from dawn on. By virtue of an ordinance issued by a government anxious to give the capital a modern aspect, the streets of La Paz are forbidden to these animals, but since they constitute the sole means of transport on the mountain trails, the spectacle of the llamas leaving the city limits at dawn under their burden of crates and sacks is, and will doubtless remain for some time, familiar to all visitors to the country. Every morning, then, as he was walking to his shop, Schonenbaum met these llama trains. He was fond of the llamas, without quite knowing why, perhaps simply because there are none in Germany. 2 or 3 Indians usually led towards the distant villages of the Andes caravans of 20 or 30 animals, able to carry burdens which often amounted to several times their own weight. One day when the sun had just risen, as he was walking down to La Paz, Schonenbaum passed one of these caravans, the sight of which always made him smile. He paused and held out his hand to stroke a passing animal. He never caressed a cat or dog, both of which abound in Germany, and he never listened to the birds, which sing in Germany too. There is no doubt that his experiences in the extermination camps had made him somewhat reserved towards the Germans. He was patting the animal's flank when his eyes were drawn to the face of the Indian walking beside it. The man was barefoot, a staff in his hand, and at first Schonenbaum paid him scarcely any attention. His casual glance almost left this face forever. It was a yellowish, fleshless face, with an eroded and stony aspect, which seemed to have been created by centuries of physiological misery. But something known, something familiar and yet terrifying and nightmarish, suddenly stirred in Schonenbaum's mind and wakened in him an extreme agitation, while his memory still refused to help him. That toothless mouth, those large gentle brown eyes opened on the world like a perpetual wound, that sad long nose, that expression of permanent reproach, half question, half accusation, hovering on the face of the man walking beside his llama, literally leaped upon the tailor when he had already turned his back. He uttered a muffled exclamation and whirled around. "Gluckman!" he shrieked. "What are you doing here?" Instinctively he had spoken in Yiddish, and the man thus addressed leaped to one side as if he had suddenly been scorched. Then he began running along the road, pursued by Schonenbaum, who loped behind him with an agility of which he had never thought himself capable, while the llamas, with their arrogant expression of disdain, continued on their way with deliberate steps. He caught up with the man at the turn in the road. grabbed his shoulder and forced him to stop. Gluckman, beyond a doubt, it was not the only similarity of features that convinced him. No, above all, it was that expression of suffering, of mute interrogation, which it was impossible to mistake. Why? Why are you doing this to me? The eyes were perpetually asking. Gluckman stood, cornered, his back against the red rock, his mouth open, revealing his naked gums. "It's you!" Schonenbaum shouted, still in Yiddish. "I tell you, it's you!" Gluckman shook his head. "It's not me," he howled back in Yiddish. "My name's Pedro. I don't know you." "And where did you learn to talk Yiddish?" Schonenbaum screamed triumphantly. "In the La Paz kindergarten." Gluckman's mouth opened still wider. He glanced wildly towards the llamas, as though seeking their help. Schonenbaum let him go. "But what are you afraid of, you idiot?" he asked. "I'm a friend. Whom are you trying to fool?" "My name's Pedro," Gluckman whined in a shrill, pleading voice, still in Yiddish. "Completely, Meshuggah," Schonenbaum said pityingly. "So your name's Pedro, and this—" he grabbed Gluckman's hand and looked at his fingers. "Not one nail. And this, I suppose it was the Indians who ripped off your nails, roots and all." Gluckman pressed still closer against the rock. His mouth closed slowly and the tears began running down his cheeks. "You're not going to turn me in," he stammered. "Turn you in?" Schonenbaum repeated. "To whom? To whom should I turn you in?" A hideous comprehension suddenly gripped his throat. Sweat burst out on his forehead. He was overcome with fear, that hideous fear which suddenly peoples the whole earth with hidden dangers. Then he managed to gain control of himself. "But it's over," he shouted. "It's been over for 15 years. Hitler is dead and buried." Up and down Gluckman's long, fleshless neck, the Adam's apple moved spasmodically, while a kind of cunning grin flickered across his face. "They always say that. I don't believe their promises." Schonenbaum took a deep breath. They were 12,000 feet above sea level. But he knew the altitude had nothing to do with it. "Gluckman," he said solemnly, "you've always been an idiot, but even so, make an effort. It's over. There is no more Hitler, no more SS, no more gas chambers. We even have a country of our own, Israel, that has an army, a judiciary, a government. It's over. There's no need to hide any more." "Ha ha ha," Gluckman laughed, without a trace of gaiety. "That won't work with me." "What won't work?" Schonenbaum shouted. "Israel," Gluckman declared. "It doesn't exist." "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" Schonenbaum thundered, stamping his foot. "It does so exist. Haven't you read the papers?" "Ha!" Gluckman said simply, with an infinitely sly expression. "There's even an Israeli council here in La Paz. You can get a visa. You can go there." "It won't work with me," Gluckman declared. "Another German trick." Schonenbaum was beginning to get gooseflesh. What frightened him most was Gluckman's superior expression. And what if he were right? He thought suddenly. The Germans were quite capable of such a trick. Present yourself at such and such a place with papers proving you're a Jew, and you'll be taken to Israel free. You present yourself, you let them put you on the ship, and you find yourself back in an extermination camp. Gluckman was right. There could be no Israel. It was only another German trap. My God, he thought, what's happening to me? He wiped his forehead and tried to smile. Then he realized that Gluckman was talking, still with that sly and knowing expression. Israel's a trick to get us all together, the last ones, all those who managed to get away, and then to gas us. It's pretty good. The Germans are clever. They know how to do things like that. They want to get us all there just like the last time. And then once we're together... Acknowledgements. I know them. We have our own Jewish state, Schonenbaum said gently, as one speaks to a child. The president's name is Ben Gurion. There's an army. We sit in the United Nations. It's over, I tell you. It won't work, Gluckman declared. I know the trick. Schonenbaum put his arm around his friend's shoulders. Come, he said. You come and stay with me. We'll go see a doctor. It took him 2 days to make some sense out of the victim's incoherent remarks. Since his liberation, which he attributed to a temporary disagreement among the anti-Semites, Gluckman had been hiding in the upper plateau of the Andes, convinced that things would return to normal from one moment to the next. but that by passing himself off as an Indian llama driver of the Sierra, he might escape the Gestapo. Each time Schonenberg tried to explain to him that there was no more Gestapo, that Streicher, Rosenberg, Himmler were gone, that Germany was a nice democratic republic. He merely shrugged his shoulders with a sly, knowing look. He knew better. He wasn't going to let himself be trapped. And when Schonenbaum, lacking any further arguments, showed him photographs of Israeli schools and army units, with their happy, confident and determined young men, Gluckman suddenly intoned a Kaddish for the dead. He mourned these new innocent victims whom the enemy's guile had managed to assemble in Israel in order to make their extermination easier, as in the days of the Warsaw Ghetto. That Gluckman was simple-minded, Schonenbaum had always known. More exactly, his reason had resisted less well than his body the nameless torments he had endured. At the camp, he had been the favourite victim of SS Commander Schultz, a sadistic brute, carefully chosen by the authorities, and altogether worthy, as he soon proved, of the confidence that Eichmann had shown in him. For some mysterious reason, he had made the wretched Gluckman his scapegoat, and none of the prisoners, connoisseurs though they were, supposed that Gluckman could emerge alive from his hands. Like Schonenbaum, he was a tailor by profession. Although his fingers had lost some skill in wielding the needle, he rapidly recovered enough agility to return to work, and the Paris tailor establishment could finally catch up with the orders that continued to flow in. Gluckman never spoke to anyone, worked in a dark corner on the floor behind the counter, hidden from the eyes of visitors, emerging only after dark to visit the llamas, whose coarse-haired flanks he stroked for a long time, and his eyes still glowed with ghastly comprehension, a kind of total knowledge occasionally accentuated by a cunning and superior smile. He knew, and that was all there was to it, and the exact nature of that knowledge was something Schonenbaum tried not to think about. Twice he tried to run away. The first time, when Schonenbaum casually remarked that the day was the 16th anniversary of the fall of Hitler's Germany, and the second, when a drunken Indian began shouting in the street that a great leader would come down from the mountains and take things in hand. It was not until 6 months after their encounter, during the week of Yom Kippur, that a perceptible change seemed to occur in Gluckman. He gave the impression of being surer of himself, almost serene, as though delivered. He no longer hid behind the counter, and one morning, as he came into the shop, Schonenbaum heard something almost incredible. Gluckman was singing. More precisely, he was mumbling under his nose an old Jewish tune from the borders of Russia. He glanced up at his friend, raised the thread to his lips, licked it, threaded the needle, and continued to mumble his old, sad, tender tune. Schonenbaum had a moment of hope. Perhaps the victim's terrible memories were finally fading. After lunch, Gluckman usually went to lie down on a mattress he kept in the back room of the shop. Yet he slept very little, remaining for hours at a time crouched in his corner, staring at the wall with an hallucinatory gaze that invested the most familiar objects with a quality of terror and turned each sound into a cry of agony. But one evening, returning unexpectedly to the shop to look for a forgotten key, Schonenbaum surprised his friend, furtively stowing a cold meal in a basket. The tailor found his key and left, but instead of returning home, he waited in the street, hidden in a doorway. Then he saw Gluckman creep out, the basket of food under his arm, and vanish into the night. Schonenbaum discovered that his friend disappeared this way every evening, always with the basket of food under his arm, and when he returned a little later, the basket would be empty, and his face would have a cunning and complacent expression, as if he had just made an excellent bargain. The tailor was tempted to ask his assistant about the purpose of these nocturnal expeditions, but knowing his retiring nature, and being reluctant to frighten him, he decided not to ask him any questions. He waited patiently in the street after work, and when he saw a furtive silhouette creeping out of the shop and gliding towards its mysterious destination, he followed. Gluckman walked quickly, keeping close to the walls, sometimes turning around as if he were trying to shake off a possible pursuer. All these precautions brought the tailor's curiosity to its peak. He leaped from doorway to doorway, concealing himself each time his assistant turned around. Night had fallen, and several times Schonenbaum almost lost track of his friend. Despite his corpulence and a rather weak heart, He nonetheless managed to catch up with him each time. Finally Gluckman turned into a courtyard off the Avenue of the Revolution. The tailor waited a moment, then ran in on tiptoe behind him. He found himself in one of the courtyards of the great market of the Estancion, from which the llama trains set out each morning towards the mountains. Indians were sleeping on their heaps of straw in a stench of manure. The llamas stuck their long necks out of crates and shop fronts. A second exit, opposite, opened onto a narrow, dimly lit alley. Gluckman had vanished. The tailor waited a moment, then shrugged his shoulders and prepared to turn back. In attempting to cover his tracks, Gluckman had taken the longest way. Schonenbaum decided to return home directly, crossing the marketplace. He had no sooner started down the narrow passageway than his attention was attracted by the glow of a kerosene lamp that filtered through the skylight of a cellar. He glanced casually towards the light and saw Gluckman. He was standing in front of a table and taking food out of his basket, arranging the items in front of someone sitting on a stool with his back to the skylight. Gluckman set out a sausage, a bottle of beer, red pimentos, and bread. The man, whose face Schonenbaum still could not see, spoke a few words, and Gluckman quickly rummaged in the basket for a cigar, which he also set on the tablecloth. The tailor had to make an effort to wrench his eyes from his friend's face, for it was terrifying. He was smiling, but the enormous fixed burning eyes lent the strangely triumphant smile something maniacal. At that moment the man turned his head and Schonenbaum recognized SS Commander Schultz, the torturer of the Torenburg camp. For one desperate second the tailor clung to the hope that he might perhaps be the victim of an hallucination, or that he had been mistaken. Yet if there was one face he was in no danger of forgetting, it was indeed the monster's face. He recalled that Schultz had vanished after the war. Some people said he was dead, some that he was living in hiding in South America. Now he saw the man with his own eyes. The arrogant heavy jaw, the cropped hair, the mocking smile. But there was something more frightening still than the monster's presence, Gluckman's. By what hideous aberration could he be there, in front of the man whose favourite victim he had been, the man who had tortured him so relentlessly for over a year? What was the logic of the madness that drove him to come here every night to feed his torturer each night instead of killing him or turning him over to the police? Schonenbaum felt his mind go blank. What he saw exceeded in its horror all the limits of the endurable. He tried to cry out, to call for help, to alert the population, but all he could do was open his mouth and wave his arms. His voice refused to obey him, and he stood there, staring with bulging eyes at the victim, who was opening the beer and filling the executioner's glass. He must have stood for a good minute in total unconsciousness. The monstrous absurdity of the scene taking place before his eyes finally robbed it of all reality. It was only when he heard a muffled exclamation beside him that he managed to regain control of himself. In the moonlight he saw Gluckman standing by his side. The two men stared at each other a moment, one with outraged incomprehension, the other with a cunning and almost cruel smile on a face in which the eyes gleamed with all the fires of some triumphant madness. Then Schonenbaum heard his own voice. He could scarcely recognize it. He tortured you every day for over a year. He martyred you, he crucified you, and instead of calling the police, you bring him food every night? Is it possible? Am I dreaming? How can you? On the victim's face, the expression of profound cunning grew more intense, and from the darkness of time rose the age-old voice that made the hair stand up on the tailor's head and froze his heart. He's promised to treat me better the next time.